The galaxy called itself orderly. It measured peace by silence, by lanes kept open and borders kept fixed, by treaties stacked upon treaties until conflict became paperwork. Enforcement fleets patrolled not to protect the weak, but to preserve. Balance. Protection was the polite word, spoken softly while resources were redirected and autonomy dissolved. Most species accepted it because open war was rare, and rarity was confused for safety. Under this system, disappearance was not. Failure. Minor civilizations were absorbed, pacified, or quietly reclassified, and the records marked compliance. No alarms sounded. Stability meant nothing changed fast enough to notice. Justice was inefficient. Order was efficient. That was enough for those who benefited. Humanity existed only as a marginal note. An isolated region with unusual resource density and no representation. Human space was flagged as undeveloped, strategically irrelevant, diplomatically naive. Analysts predicted eventual submission with statistical confidence. Every emerging species sought protection. Earth would too. It was only a matter of time. Patrol fleets ran simulations near human borders, not for combat but for delay. Scenarios focused on missed forms, late responses, and negotiation windows. Resistance was not modeled. Humanity was assumed to be disorganized, divided, and impressed by scale. Silence from Earth was interpreted as uncertainty, not intent. Admirals trusted doctrine. Diplomats trusted precedent. Analysts trusted data refined across centuries of managed order. Unknown variables were considered. Solved problems. The system had endured too long to be surprised now. There was no crisis in this moment. No warning sirens. No mobilization. Only confidence layered over habit, and habit mistaken for wisdom. The galaxy believed it understood power completely, because nothing had challenged its definitions in generations. It did not notice the flaw. In its logic, the Accords were celebrated as neutral, but neutrality favored those already powerful. Enforcement councils rotated titles, not priorities. Decisions moved slowly by design, ensuring outcomes never threatened the structure itself. Species learned to survive by adapting to rules rather than questioning them. Compliance became culture. Maps of known space showed human territory as a quiet block of color. No disputes, no traffic, no petitions. That absence was read as emptiness. Sensors saw little. Probes reported nothing alarming. To the galaxy, quiet meant harmless. Confidence settled deeper. Fleets drilled for rebellions, not rescues. Laws were written to manage exceptions, not conscience. The machine of order continued smoothly, convinced it had accounted for every possibility that mattered. No one asked what humanity valued. No. One checked why it stayed silent. Assumptions filled the gap, and assumptions hardened into certainty. The system mistook patience for weakness, and distance for submission, without realizing both were chosen. Deliberately, carefully, without external validation. Humanity had never agreed to any of it. Galactic intelligence reduced humanity to charts and margins. Reports labeled humans technologically uneven, politically fragmented, culturally emotional. The lack of representation in council chambers was logged as failure, not refusal. Analysts spoke of Earth as a case study in delayed development, a species that had not yet learned how power was supposed to work. Sensor summaries highlighted what was missing. No massive border fleets, no visible forward bases, no patrol traffic that matched a serious military economy. The conclusion was comfortable. Earth could not afford real defense. Whatever weapons it possessed would be symbolic, not decisive. When Earth appeared in briefings, it was as an administrative item. A future protection zone, a region to be stabilized. Draft contracts circulated long before any contact, outlining tariffs, oversight, and cultural guidance. The language was gentle, instructional, and absolute. Humanity was not expected to negotiate terms. only to accept them. Simulations ran in clean rooms and projected quick compliance. Exposure to unified galactic force ended every scenario the same way: short confusion, internal disagreement, eventual submission. Admirals debated which enforcement group would inherit jurisdiction once Earth was processed. None questioned the outcome, only the allocation. Human silence reinforced every assumption. Closed borders were logged as defensive fear. The absence of diplomatic outreach was interpreted as ignorance. Humanity did not broadcast its strength, so strength was assumed absent. History suggested this pattern never changed. Confidence spread without challenge. Data fed models, models fed certainty, certainty fed policy. Overconfidence hardened into doctrine, and doctrine replaced curiosity. No one considered why humanity had never tested galactic defenses. No one asked why a supposedly emotional species had shown no reaction at all. The galaxy believed it was approaching a primitive world standing alone. A civilization that would be relieved to be noticed, grateful for structure, safe once guided. The idea that Earth had chosen isolation, that it had watched and measured and decided, never entered the discussion. By the time the final protection drafts were archived and ready for signature, humanity had already been dismissed, not as an enemy, not even as a risk, simply as something unfinished, waiting to be managed. That dismissal shaped every decision that followed. Fleets planned routines, not contingencies. Laws were prepared for supervision, not resistance. Curiosity was replaced by scheduling. Humanity existed only as a future problem already solved on paper. The galaxy did not realize that nothing about Earth was late or accidental. Silence was policy. Absence was camouflage. And while intelligence offices closed their files with confidence, something beyond their models remained untouched, unmeasured, and entirely unconcerned with approval. Those assumptions would soon collide with a reality that neither tradition, nor treaties, nor numbers could contain any longer. Now, the incident began far from Earth, in a region the galaxy considered settled and quiet. A human civilian transport crossed open space beyond claimed trade lanes, its registry valid under no accord because humanity had never signed one. That absence made it vulnerable. An enforcement-aligned private fleet intercepted the vessel without hostility, without urgency, and without resistance. Under accord law, the seizure was permitted. Under human law, it was abduction. The transport was disabled with precision. No weapons fire followed. Boarding teams moved calmly, recording inventory and life signs. Human passengers were restrained, cataloged, and reclassified as labor assets, pending jurisdiction review. Families were separated to maintain order. Children were logged as dependents. Everything was procedural. Everything was legal. The galaxy treated the report as routine. Automated systems filed the incident under commercial dispute. Arbitration queues updated with projected resolution dates months away. No alarms triggered. No emergency protocols engaged. The victims were human, and humans were not numbers. Time, as defined by the Accords, remained abundant. Then the data reached Earth. It arrived incomplete and compressed, pushed through channels never intended for distress. Biometric spikes, heart rates peaking and cutting out. Interior sensor feeds showing containment fields activating. Audio fragments distorted by interference, carrying fear without language. The classification codes were clear enough. Detention, labor, asset transfer. Human systems flagged the transmission without ceremony. No committee convened. No legal analysis followed. The question was simple and final. Are the civilians alive? Once confirmed, discussion ended. Legality did not enter the process. Jurisdiction was irrelevant. No one referenced the Accords. No one asked who had authority. Values replaced procedure with immediate clarity. Civilians had been taken. Delay would compound harm. Waiting was not an option. Across the galaxy, time remained a resource to be managed. Schedules updated, notifications delayed. The system functioned as designed, confident that distance and process provided insulation. It assumed compliance would eventually be negotiated and damages assessed. Humanity reached a different conclusion. Time was no longer a factor to consider. Every passing moment increased risk. Every procedural step elsewhere translated into suffering, measured in seconds. The galaxy relied on rules to excuse what it allowed. Humans relied on obligation to define what they would not. No declaration was issued, no protest filed. The response did not take shape as anger or outrage, but as certainty. The harm was clear. The responsibility was accepted. The galaxy believed it had months. Humanity decided it had none. Terran leadership convened without ceremony. The protocol had existed for decades, dormant but complete, waiting for a condition no one expected to debate. Civilians had been taken. That condition was met. No speeches followed. No votes were required. The response was obligation, not anger. And obligation did not argue. There was no outreach to allies because none were needed. No petitions were drafted because permission was irrelevant. Galactic courts were not consulted because delay equaled harm. Human doctrine was clear when non-combatants were involved. Proportional response ended. Rescue began. Orders moved through. Channels never visible to external sensors. Fleets that did not exist in public records transitioned from standby to active status. Hulls powered systems that had never been tested under observation. Crews boarded ships already supplied, already fueled, already assigned. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was debated. No declarations were transmitted. No warnings were issued. Borders were not acknowledged. Territorial claims were treated as administrative noise. The only coordinates that mattered were the last confirmed positions of human lives in captivity. Everything else became background, emotion. Never left the room because it was never invited in. Determination replaced reaction. The language of the orders was short, precise, and absolute. Retrieve civilians. Avoid collateral loss. Accept damage. Do not disengage until completion. Number. Clause allowed retreat. As the fleets departed, the galaxy did not notice. Monitoring arrays tracked expected traffic, not anomalies. Bureaucratic filters delayed anything that did not match known patterns. Authorization requests moved through queues measured in hours and days. Humanity required minutes. The contrast widened with every second. One system waited for confirmation. The other acted on certainty. One side trusted process to maintain control. The other trusted preparation to ensure outcome. By the time alerts were drafted, human ships were already in transit through corridors no treaty had ever mapped. The line was crossed without announcement. Not by aggression, but by neglect. Civilians had been treated as assets. That choice rewrote every rule. Consequences were no longer theoretical. They were moving, silently and deliberately, toward their objective. And nothing built for order was fast enough to stop what had already begun. Across the stars, databases still updated calmly, unaware that relevance had expired. Timelines assumed negotiation. Risk models assumed hesitation. Humanity assumed responsibility. The rescue force advanced without signal flare or escort, moving along vectors that ignored expectations and exploited predictability. Every system they passed continued to function normally because nothing had been designed to detect a response that did not announce itself. By the time the galaxy would realize a decision had been made, the decision would no longer be reversible, and the cost of indifference would be measured not in fines or rulings, but in consequences no regulation could pause or undo. It was not war that had begun, but motion. Purpose replaced debate. While councils slept and forms waited for signatures, human ships closed distance. The galaxy would learn too late that some decisions, once executed, did not allow appeal or reversal ever. Again, the private fleet detected the human vessel at extreme range and dismissed it immediately. One ship, light mass profile, no escort, no visible formation support. Inside regulated space, inside their jurisdiction. Hails were transmitted automatically, citing enforcement authority, violation codes, and projected penalties. The tone was procedural. The situation was considered controlled. The human ship did not answer. It continued on its vector, unchanged, closing distance with steady acceleration. No threat response, no posture shift, no electronic acknowledgement. The private fleet adjusted formation slightly, not defensively, but to assert presence. This was not a combat scenario. It was compliance enforcement. Then systems failed. Not all at once, not explosively. One propulsion unit went dark, then another. A containment field flickered. Power routing collapsed across multiple hulls with no shared impact signature. Formation coherence broke as ships lost synchronized movement. Commands issued cleanly. Responses did not arrive. The human vessel did not fire broadly. It did not trade salvos. It carved access. Precision strikes cut engines, power spines, and internal locks without breaching hulls. Ships drifted intact and helpless, weapons charged. But inert. The private fleet realized too late this was not escalation. It was bypass. Command authority unraveled faster than sensors could explain. Targeting solutions failed because targets no longer mattered. The human ship ignored armed vessels entirely, slipping between them on vectors that exploited their own safety spacing. Defensive fire erupted late and uncoordinated, striking nothing vital. Boarding locks on the civilian transport disengaged without warning. Extraction began under fire. Human teams moved with singular priority, shielding evacuees while disabling. Pursuit craft as needed. The human ship absorbed damage without altering course. Hull plating vented. Internal alarms registered. No retreat command followed. The private fleet attempted to regroup. Jurisdiction threats escalated to combat warnings. None were acknowledged. Authority meant nothing to an operation that did not recognize it. This was not a warning. This was retrieval. The last civilian cleared containment as a secondary reactor failed on one enforcement ship, cascading shutdowns across the formation. Silence followed, broken only by drifting metal and unanswered signals. The human vessel departed. The same way it arrived, alone, damaged, uninterested in victory. It left behind a fleet that still existed, but no longer functioned. Shock settled where certainty had been. Awe followed fear. Records would later describe the encounter as an engagement, but no battle lines had formed. No territory had changed. Hands. Only an assumption had been destroyed. If one ship could do this without declaration or reinforcement, the galaxy was forced to confront a question. It was not prepared to ask. What had humanity been holding back? Reports moved faster than confirmation. Fragmented sensor logs appeared across enforcement networks before official summaries were cleared for release. Data conflicted with doctrine. Engagement ranges did not align. Damage patterns made no sense. Analysts flagged errors, then flagged each other. The incident was labeled an anomaly to preserve confidence. That label did not last. Quiet revisions followed. Threat assessment parameters adjusted without announcement. Internal bulletins changed language from irregular to unexpected. Simulation libraries were reopened. None of the existing models reproduced the outcome. A single human vessel had neutralized a regulated fleet without annihilation, without escalation protocols, without precedent. Fear began at the margins. Minor powers noticed first. The Accords had not protected a licensed enforcement fleet operating legally. That realization traveled quickly through systems that relied on paperwork as armor. If compliance did not guarantee safety, then order was conditional. Major powers reacted more slowly. Their concern was not protection, but deterrence. The Accords were designed to discourage resistance through inevitability. Humanity had ignored that inevitability entirely. No sanction had delayed them. No warning had slowed them. The implication was unsettling. Debate fractured along familiar lines. Some analysts argued the humans had violated galactic law. Others pointed out the flaw. Law only applied to signatories. Humanity had never been one. That detail, long dismissed as temporary, now carried weight. No regulation could reduce. Then the civilian accounts leaked. Recovered humans spoke of restraint, not conquest. Of evacuation corridors cut through chaos. Of hostile fire absorbed without response beyond necessity. The narrative shifted, slowly and then all at once. This had not been aggression, it had been retrieval. A rescue conducted without asking whether permission existed. Public confidence eroded. Enforcement statements softened. Phrases like excessive response replaced criminal action. That distinction mattered. It split opinion across councils and systems. If the humans had acted to save civilians, then the system itself was exposed. Humanity offered no clarification. No broadcast followed the encounter. No threat declaration. No demand for apology or compensation. The damaged ship withdrew. Space returned to routine traffic patterns. That silence unsettled more than any ultimatum could have. Military planners waited for follow-up strikes that never came. Diplomats waited for demands that did not arrive. Intelligence agencies searched for build-up and found none they could confirm. Humanity had demonstrated capability, then disappeared again. Unease replaced certainty. If humans could act with that speed and precision without mobilization, then detection models were incomplete. If they could disengage without signaling intent, then warning time no longer existed. The galaxy had faced aggressive powers before. They announced themselves. They postured. They demanded. Humanity had done none of that. It had intervened once, decisively, and returned to silence. That restraint was not reassuring. It suggested choice. Fear spread not because war seemed imminent, but because it did not. The system had no framework for a power that responded only when values were crossed, and otherwise remained invisible. Somewhere in the silence, assumptions continued to collapse. The galaxy responded the only way it understood. Patrol numbers increased along disputed corridors. Enforcement fleets staged visible drills. Sanctions were announced and broadcast with ceremonial language meant to signal control. Border probes entered human-adjacent space under legal justification, transmitting compliance codes and authority markers. Humanity answered none of it directly. Instead, supply nodes failed. Fuel depots reported inventory mismatches that could not be traced to theft or malfunction. Relay stations lost synchronization and quietly shut down. Enforcement fleets discovered their logistics chains thinning without explanation. Ships remained intact. Crews remained alive. But resupply windows closed, one by one. No engagements were recorded. No hostile contacts confirmed. The effect spread anyway. The tactics made no sense to those trained in fleet doctrine. Humans were not contesting space. They were not seizing worlds. They ignored patrol formations and bypassed heavily armed task groups entirely. Instead, the structures that allowed those fleets to function simply stopped working. A system would operate normally until it did not, and when it failed, nothing identifiable had attacked it. Sanctions escalated. Borders tightened. More probes were sent. Each response triggered another quiet failure somewhere else. Maintenance. Hubs went dark. Navigation archives corrupted themselves beyond recovery. Enforcement vessels found critical components degrading at impossible rates, forcing withdrawal without a single shot exchanged. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every disruption followed civilian harm investigations. Fleets linked to detentions, embargo enforcement, or labor seizures experienced cascading logistical collapse. Those without such records were untouched. Humanity was not striking blindly. It was selecting. No claims were made. No territory was marked. Human ships were still rarely seen. The absence became part of the threat. Systems failed without warning, and no sensor could say why. Defensive preparations were useless against an enemy that did not appear. Fear shifted into paranoia. Commanders rerouted ships constantly, chasing safety through motion. Councils froze initiatives, unsure which action might provoke another invisible response. No one could predict where the next failure would occur, because no one understood the rules being enforced. And yet, a rule was becoming clear. Civilians were the line. Human actions were always reactive, never preemptive. Infrastructure collapsed only after harm had already occurred. The punishment was not dramatic, but it was absolute. Fleets could not operate. Markets could not supply. Authority became meaningless without function to support it. Some began to call the tactics insane. They violated every accepted principle of warfare. Others began to call them disciplined. The precision was undeniable. The restraint was deliberate. Humanity was not dismantling the galaxy. It was disabling behaviors it found unacceptable. Respect followed fear, unwilling and unspoken. The humans were no longer dismissed. They were no longer underestimated. They were something worse. They were incomprehensible. Every attempt to force escalation failed because escalation was not the game being played. Humanity did not seek dominance. It sought consequence. And consequence, applied without warning and without occupation, proved impossible to counter. The galaxy had learned how to fight enemies it could see. It had no answer for a civilization that treated logistics as leverage and morality as trigger. As systems flickered and authority eroded, one realization settled across the stars. If humanity decided to stop you from functioning, it would. And you might never know why, until it was already too late. No announcement would precede the failure. No explanation would follow. Only results would remain, drifting through reports and empty depots. The galaxy felt watched, measured, and judged by a standard it did not write and could not appeal. That awareness changed behavior, but never fast enough to guarantee safety again, anywhere. Ever. Coalition talks began behind closed channels, urgent and unanimous. Major powers set aside rivalries and invoked emergency statutes, framing humanity as an existential destabilizer. Public statements spoke of protecting order, preserving trade, and preventing chaos. In private, leaders spoke of something else. Control was slipping, and precedent was breaking. Committees consolidated into a single command framework. Fleets were pledged in numbers meant to reassure. Jurisdictional disputes were paused. Authority was unified by fear of losing it entirely. The alliance told itself that no civilization could withstand coordinated mass. Unity had ended every disruption before. This would be no different. Plans emphasized visibility. Overwhelming. Presence would compel compliance where sanctions had failed. Legal mandates were prepared to legitimize force. The objective was not annihilation, but submission. Humanity would be shown the cost of defiance, then absorbed into structure like all the others. Across the border, humanity did nothing observable. No counter-deployments were announced. No patrol surges detected. Traffic patterns remained unchanged. To the Alliance, this absence confirmed their expectations. Restraint was interpreted as hesitation. Silence was taken as calculation under pressure. Humanity was not idle. Preparation did not require spectacle. Defensive environments were finalized. Contingencies were activated without movement. Systems were aligned to receive, isolate, and respond. No attempt was made to disrupt the coalition's assembly. There was no advantage in revealing readiness. The Alliance mistook this for opportunity. Timetables accelerated. Confidence returned. Numbers were counted and compared. Simulations finally produced outcomes that felt familiar. Humanity could be forced into negotiation. Boundaries could be redrawn. The tension tightened as fleets assembled. Every ship represented law, mass, and inevitability. Every order assumed the same truth. That resistance collapsed under scale. Humanity watched and waited. The test was approaching. Not of strength, but of understanding. The galaxy was preparing to apply mass and legality against a civilization that did not seek victory, did not seek expansion, and did not measure success in territory gained. It measured only whether its boundaries were crossed when the coalition moved. It would learn whether numbers could overcome purpose, and whether rules could restrain a response that did not recognize them. The assumption felt safe because it always had. Authority had been enforced through scale for centuries, and deviation had been corrected through pressure. The coalition believed history itself supported their decision. Humanity, they assumed, would bend once confronted with combined fleets, formal mandates, and undeniable presence. What they failed to recognize was that this response was anticipated, not feared. Humanity had never expected acceptance. It had planned for intrusion. As ships aligned and orders synchronized, the distance between expectation and reality narrowed. The coming contact would not decide who ruled space. It would decide whether the galaxy could understand a boundary when it encountered one. That lesson would arrive without negotiation, without warning, and without the reassurance of familiar outcomes the coalition had always relied upon. Momentum carried them forward, convinced inevitability was a weapon rather than a vulnerability. Waiting to be exposed at last fully, the coalition crossed into the exclusion zone with confidence reinforced by scale. Hundreds of hulls advanced in layered formations, legal mandates synchronized, command authority unified. Sensors showed nothing resembling a defensive line, no border forts, no minefields, no fleets waiting to contest entry. The absence was interpreted as weakness finally exposed. Then the environment changed. Navigation data began to drift, not sharply enough to trigger alarms, but enough to desynchronize formations. Standardized correction protocols activated automatically across the coalition fleet. That response was expected. What was not expected was the response to the response. Power fluctuations rippled through command. Ships as synchronization routines looped endlessly, each system correcting against the others. Communications lagged, then fragmented. Orders arrived out of sequence. Formation discipline softened, then fractured. As ships attempted to compensate for errors they could not isolate, humanity did not appear. The first ships lost propulsion. Without impact, drives spun down into safe mode, awaiting confirmations that never arrived. Neighboring vessels adjusted, triggering identical routines. Cascading failures spread outward, not through weapons fire, but through dependency. The coalition realized too late that its greatest strength standardization had become a vulnerability. Containment zones activated next, not explosive, not lethal. Fields snapped into place around isolated clusters, cutting them off from maneuver space and reinforcement. Ships remained intact. Crews remained alive. They were simply trapped inside volumes of space that no longer responded to their controls. Panic surged where doctrine failed. Admirals attempted manual overrides. That choice accelerated collapse. Human systems anticipated deviation and punished it with precision. Every attempt to regain initiative triggered another layer. The exclusion zone was not defended. It was curated. Only then did human vessels become visible. They did not charge. They did not pursue. They held positions that defined boundaries, not targets. Their presence clarified what the coalition had already lost. This was not a battlefield. It was an environment shaped long before contact, designed to receive intrusion and neutralize it without collateral harm. Entire fleets went silent without a single hull breach. The revelation was not spoken. It unfolded through consequence. Humanity had prepared for invasion long before it ever left its borders, not from paranoia, but from experience written in its history. Borders were not lines on maps. They were conditions. When crossed, responses were automatic, measured, and irreversible. The coalition's numerical superiority meant nothing inside a system that turned scale into liability. More ships meant more interdependence. More authority meant more assumptions. Humanity exploited both without hatred, without urgency, and without excess. Attempts to escalate failed instantly. Weapons could not lock. Targets could not be assigned. Firepower existed only as potential, never realized. The coalition understood then that annihilation had never been the goal. Survival was permitted by design. Retreat commands were issued. Across broken channels, some ships responded. Others could not. Human vessels adjusted containment vectors, opening corridors that led only one direction. Out. There was no pursuit. No final blow. Just pressure applied until movement aligned with permission. Retreat was enforced not by destruction, but by inevitability. Every ship that attempted defiance lost function. Every ship that complied regained it. Terror took hold as awe followed. This was power that did not seek conquest. This was control exercised solely to stop harm. The galaxy realized too late that humanity had never needed permission because it had never intended to rule. Authority had been irrelevant from the beginning. As the last coalition vessels crossed back into open space, systems restored themselves without explanation. Drives reignited, communications stabilized. The exclusion zone returned to silence. Humanity did not follow. The defeat was total without annihilation. Fleets survived, but certainty did not. The coalition had tested mass against purpose and legality against resolve. It had discovered the limits of both. What remained was understanding, carved into memory by restraint. Humanity had drawn a boundary and enforced it absolutely. The galaxy would remember where that boundary lay, not because it had been declared, but because crossing it had proven unbearable. Survival had been allowed. That mercy carried weight heavier than destruction. In the aftermath, humanity spoke once. The transmission was unencrypted, unadorned, and broadcast across every reachable band. It carried no symbols of rank, no legal citations, no emotional emphasis. It did not accuse, it did not threaten. It stated facts, calmly and without room for reinterpretation. Human space is sovereign. Human civilians are non-negotiable. Entry without consent will be met with response, not negotiation. There was nothing else. No demands for reparations. No enumeration of losses. No declaration of victory. The message ended as cleanly as it began, leaving silence where outrage was expected. The galaxy listened. Councils convened and found nothing to debate. Analysts replayed the message looking for subtext and found none. The meaning was complete. On first reception, humanity had not asked to be acknowledged. It had defined a boundary and demonstrated its enforcement. Respect replaced condescension quietly. Not as admiration, but as recalibration. Human space was no longer modeled as a future problem. It was a fixed condition. Trade routes adjusted. Patrol doctrines changed language. The word protection disappeared from drafts involving Earth. Minor powers altered behavior first. Civilian policies tightened. Detention practices halted. The lesson had been learned at a distance, but clearly. Major powers followed, slower and less willingly, but they followed. No one wanted to test whether the silence could end again. Humanity did not expand. It did not pursue influence. Its fleets returned to obscurity, their movements once again indistinguishable from absence. Borders remained closed, but no longer mocked. They were mapped carefully, avoided deliberately. The system itself remained intact. The Accords still governed most of space. Enforcement fleets still existed. Control had not been dismantled. It had been constrained. A civilization outside the structure had forced the structure to recognize a limit. Uneasy peace settled in. Not because trust had been built, but because certainty had been restored. The galaxy understood where it could not go, and why. Humanity had shown restraint where annihilation was possible, and resolve where compromise was expected. That combination endured. In quiet briefings, leaders acknowledged what could not be. Written publicly, humanity was not an ally. It was not an enemy. It was something more difficult. A civilization that could not be coerced, delayed, or absorbed. It could only be respected. The future remained unchanged in form, but altered in substance. Expansion continued. Politics resumed. Conflicts persisted at the margins. But one assumption had been removed forever. Human lives were not leverage. Human space was not negotiable. And the next time the system reached outward without regard, it would remember the cost of indifference and the certainty of response waiting. Beyond a boundary that no longer needed explanation, it would remember that silence was not absence, that restraint was not weakness, and that some civilizations answered harm with procedure, while others answered it with action, measured and final, leaving space unchanged in shape, but permanently altered in understanding. That memory would outlast treaties, fleets, councils, and any future attempt to pretend boundaries were suggestions again today.